We've got over 130, 140 videos up there right now, and they're kind of good to go back and review some of the things that you might have seen, or share it with other people that you're like, oh, so-and-so should have been at the session. Here's your way to get it from there. Like many of our campus programs, we are judged by how many people we affect. So, butts and seats, bring your buddy, clap. Let me make that point again. All right. We have evaluation sheets, these little blue sheets that you'll all get a copy of before you leave. And we'd love it if you would fill those out. We're trying to collect as much data so that we can show our supervisors and administrators that this is actually valuable. And without your voice, they don't believe us, so they need to hear from you. Plus, we also change things up. We make adjustments. We iterate based on your feedback, so please do. For example, the exchanges are based on, we had a lot of people saying, oh, this is a really cool topic, you should have talked about it more, you should have unpacked it more. And some of the things were like, this doesn't make any sense for me to play with how to do this because I'm already an expert, so the exchanges are sort of for that. Some of you have name tags on here. If you've been here a couple of times, we decided to make the name tag and save on stickers. So feel free to please leave those and grab them next time. And that's what I have today. We'll have John come up, and John, we have you introduce yourself, and that way, for the video, we can just cut it right before you start and cut me out of there.
Oh, if I'll do it yourself, okay.
All right.
If I can wake my computer up.
Oh, I should also say, Sarah Hagen is here today. Sarah, what would you like to say about this handout?
I noticed that this is a group of people interested in peer review, and I'm part of a group that's looking at possible tools that integrate with Canvas or not to do peer review and group member evaluation. So I have a survey that I'd love for you to take a look at to see if we're capturing the features that are important to people in a peer review product, if the survey makes sense, and just if there's anything that you would add to it that's an important feature. You don't need to fill out the survey, but just kind of I'm looking for feedback before we give it out to a targeted group of instructors. Thank you.
My name is John Moore. I'm in the chemistry department. I've been teaching an intermediate inorganic course now since around 2000. I guess I'm a little curious. Wonder if other people, there aren't that many of us, would introduce themselves and say which department you're from, so I get a picture of what the audience is like a little bit more. I know who Rachel is. She's also in the chemistry department, but.
Hi, I'm Fawn from the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures. So I'm teaching Chinese language classes on campus, and I'm here looking for some technologies to let my students to do peer reviews for them for their language. Yeah.
Great.
I'm Dan Pell, and I'm here in DoIT Academic Technology.
Okay.
Kira Skiva, Division of Continuing Studies. I'm faculty learn how to teach online, so I thought this would be useful.
Great.
Emily Baker, I'm also in continuing studies, and I'm also working with Sarah, looking for peer review tools.
Louis Leffler, Continuing Studies.
I'm Julie, I'm with DoIT Academic Technology as well. I'm Anjali, I am an instructional technologist and a librarian with school education.
Sarah Hagen, I'm an instructional technologist in SEAT in the College of Engineering.
Steve Faldo, I'm at the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and I also work for continuing studies.
And John Martin, DoIT Academic Technology, and I love peer review and the idea of students learning from each other.
Okay, so I've been using this calibrated peer review since spring of 2012, I believe. And myself and two other faculty members have taught the same course since then, and everybody has been using the calibrated peer review system. My colleague Judith Burston, whose name I probably should have put on here as well, but I knew she wasn't coming and Rachel was coming, so she's on here. also contributed to refining the materials, and as we go along, you can kind of see what that means. But we feel like this is now an integrated component of the course that is just there. There are some of the same kind of functions available in Canvas. I haven't explored them because we had this system and I'm not in the mood to change. And so I can't really tell you much about that, but I can tell you about how the calibrated peer review. Well, and I guess the other thing that I should say, to some extent, I'm a shill for a colleague at UCLA who runs the calibrated peer review system. It originated in the chemistry department at UCLA. And Arlene Russell sort of asked me if I would be interested in getting into this early on. And I said, yes, I want to try it out. And I started trying it out. And she kind of oversaw what I was doing, which was a helpful part of getting into this process. So, what is it? Well, there's two different perspectives on that. One is from the instructor, and that is you want to have some sort of writing task that the students are going to do. You set up whatever that writing task is and define what would be a good version of a written report or text or essay or whatever it might be. You then write, I'm sorry, one more thing. You set up some sort of a rubric, set of criteria by which you would evaluate the writing task. You probably do this with any writing task that you would have, but this is the first step in doing this. Second, you write 3 example texts. A good one, an average one, a poor one. These are going to be used for the calibration of the peer reviewers. And you then tailor your rubric or the feedback that comes from your rubric to these 3 texts. That is, you evaluate each of the texts using the rubric, and then you provide what amounts initially to a multiple choice question in the rubric about each of the texts, and you see which of the multiple choices applies to that text. And then you can provide some feedback that also goes to the students. So there's a fair amount of work to do initially to get it set up the first time around. You then go into the online system and you create an assignment. And I won't go through the specifics of doing that because it takes a little while to do. But you need to upload these texts or get the text to where the students can see them. You need to put the rubric in, the questions, the answers, the feedback. And you also need to set up some other aspects. There's a prompt for what the students will do, what they should do before they write their text. In our case, the texts are laboratory reports. And so we'll give some potential references, for example, that a student could go to help them write a report on their laboratory work. That is, references that apply to the same content area as the laboratory was. And in fact, we even also provide the students with a sample text, which is a published paper by Judith Burston, which has all of the features that we want in the student's text. So we do all of that stuff ahead of time. The second thing is the students, and you have a much nicer flowchart for that in front of you here, which I might have tried to fit on a slide, but I didn't see how anybody could read it on a slide. But on a piece of paper, you can.
Barely.
Sorry?
Barely, but we tried.
Well, I think it works pretty well on here, but I was going to make a flowchart, and then I thought, yeah, by the time we get all the words in, nobody can read them. So the student logs in. They write their lab report in, well, a text editor. We say use Microsoft Word, but they could use anything they want. They create a PDF file of that so that they can upload it, and it will have all of the We don't have any font problems or other things like that. And they go into the CPR and they upload their text. They can actually type the text into CPR as well, but we've always had them upload it because ours is a full lab report. If it was a shorter text, it would be easy to have them just type it right in, and then you could avoid making a PDF file and so on. And then they submit it. And here's a minor glitch in the system. You have to do this in 2 steps. You upload the text, and then you submit it. Because you could have filled in that blank and then submit it, or you can upload the text and then submit it. Some of them forget that I've uploaded the text, I'm done, now I go home and do something else. So it's just sitting there, but it hasn't been submitted. So Rachel and I get to submit it. Or you could just let it go and the student wouldn't be in the system, but we tend to watch the deadlines. Then they evaluate these 3 texts that you wrote, 3 example texts, using the rubric that is built into the system. So they'll look at the text and there'll be a question in the rubric. Is the title of this text appropriate? That's more general than ours is a little more specific than that. But fundamentally, you look at each of the features of the text. Ours has a title, an abstract, which should be a summary of the results of what's in the text. And then an introduction that sets the stage for what they've done, an experimental part, a results section where they report what the results they got from the experiment, and then a discussion section where they discuss the results. And so the rubric asks questions about each of these different sections. Did it do this? Did it do this? Did it do that? And prompts them then, and they apply this rubric to each of those 3 texts. So they've actually read 3 lab reports before they're calibrated. Then it checks on the calibration because we can set limits. Okay, they had maybe 10 questions about this text. Did they come within 1.5 points, or what, we can specify whatever that is, of what we thought it should be for that text? And if they're not within that, they get to cycle back. But if they are within that, they get to proceed. And they don't get to review any other student's text until after they have calibrated. So presumably, by the time they're reviewing other students' texts, they are well calibrated as to how to carry out the evaluation. Yes.
So on this, if they get cycled back, is it possible, say I've been doing this same thing for a couple of years, can I replace the 3 with 6, 2 good, 2 medium, and 2, and that way they get other examples? No. Okay, it's just the same 3 examples.
Well, no, wait a minute. They only get 3 examples at any one time.
Right.
If you had 6 examples, you could use 3 of them for one assignment, and next year you could use a different 3.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what
It's a
you're
single
asking.
assignment, it's the 3.
They get the 3, okay.
And the second time they calibrate, they get
The same 3.
Right. Well, actually, the second time they calibrate, yeah, in our case, they do get the same 3. Third time they calibrate, they get a different 3.
Oh.
So.
No. When they calibrate.
Oh, you didn't say
within an
recalibrate.
assignment.
Yeah.
Within an assignment.
And in each assignment, they get the same 3 all the time.
All right.
Yeah, they don't get a different 3. Okay. So they're now calibrated. Now, they can review what they did in the calibration. I'm not sure how many do this. We don't have any statistics on whether they actually do that. They then apply the same rating scale to 3 reports, anonymized reports of other students. So they evaluate those other 3 students' reports. They then review their own report using the same set of criteria. So now they're going back to their own lab report and looking at it, but now having calibrated using the rubric and having reviewed some other students' reports, now they look at their own and they're asked to evaluate their own report. And part of their grade depends on how accurately relative to what the other students said about their report. So they can't just say, oh, my report is really cool, you know, it's way up here, it's a 10. Because that'll net them less credit than if they evaluated their report honestly based on what they've been doing with all the other reports.
So at the end of the process, they've seen at least 7 different versions of varying qualities of the content.
Yeah, if you count theirs.
Which is kind of a cool way to
And spend a lot of time looking at lab reports when we do this.
Yeah.
Right. Or whatever it is that they would write. I mean, the fact that there's a lab report is because I'm teaching a chemistry course.
Sure.
But it can be any type of writing that you want, on which you can set a group of criteria for what would be a good, average, and poor report.
Awesome.
So then, after the assignment is over, they get feedback, and they, depending on what you want, you can either allow them or not allow them to see the reviews of their own reports. And I do caution students ahead of time. Well, actually, because it's true, I tell them that I once was a journal editor, and this is the process that is used with a real scientific report. You write up your report, you do the best you can with it, you send it in, the editor sends it to some reviewers, the reviewers make comments on it, they come back to you. Now in this case we don't say, yeah, no, it's rejected, or no, you have to revise it, it's going to come back again. But fundamentally it's the same process. And the reviewers need to provide constructive, courteous comments about the text that they're looking at. And I haven't gone in and looked at all the comments to make sure this was true, but I think by and large it's true that they take that seriously and provide a good constructive criticism of the other students' reports. And a lot of students have commented that, yeah, this was great, I could see what other students did, and I could also see what other students suggested about what I did. So that's the overall process. Questions about that? Yes?
You said that each student would evaluate 3 other reports.
Right.
How do you avoid having all the students evaluate the same report?
CPR takes care of it.
Okay.
The process is, well, and there are deadlines in here. Part of the reason for the deadlines is they need to get everybody's report in, we need to get everybody calibrated, and then it apportions all of these reports to students so that they have no clue as to whose report they're evaluating, but they all get 3 to do and they all get done. And you don't have to worry about that. I don't know how it does it, but it does it. And I don't care how it does it, but it does it. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the rubric side of this. How flexible are the rubrics that you can put in? Is it a very formulaic kind of approach to doing a rubric, or can you choose just about anything you want as a rubric? And then can you get written comments?
Yeah, anything you want. I don't think you can put like graphics into the rubric, but you can write a question in any way you want. Usually they're made up with several choices so that you can give feedback for each choice. So I'll show you an example in a minute, but I would say they're pretty flexible. But it depends. I mean, depending on what you're teaching, it might not be, because I haven't imagined what you would like to do with it.
And can they put written comments onto the PDFs that
No, the written comment, the comments though that other students will write are then recorded in CPR, and the student then can read them.
Okay.
So no, they don't go into the PDF, but they're there, and the student can see. And in our case, where we have specific sections in the text, it's relatively easy for a student to say they're commenting on the results section, for example. You didn't specify the instrument that you used to get this result. And another student can say, well, then that was a reason that I downgraded the results section because that wasn't done, and put that comment in, and then the student can see it. Okay.
And I think they're required to comment with each rating that they give. For each
But there's a setting, I think. I think you can set it so that they don't have to, but generally I've set it so they do.
Right.
Yeah.
And their comments are applied generally over the whole paper, so in the comment they have to say, in the conclusion I did this.
Well,
it's
no,
not,
because they're key to the rubric. And the rubric, in our case, the rubric is asking them about the sections.
I got it.
Okay, so yes, if you had like one text and all of your rubric things applied to the whole text, then what you said would be true, because there wouldn't be any way to key it to this part of the text or that part of the text, and then it'd be a little harder for students to specify. But in our case, the rubric is key to the different sections of the text. And then the questions in the rubric are where the question in the rubric is given, and the response to that is also given, or the feedback that comes with that is
And I'm
also
keeping you
given.
from showing an example, so I'll let you
Okay, so I said chemistry 311. You don't care about the periodic table. You don't care about descriptive and synthetic inorganic chemists, but Rachel and I, being inorganic chemists, do. Students range from second semester first year through second semester senior year, so we have a broad range of student backgrounds. This is a required course for the chemistry majors, so all chemistry majors take it. Some of them will take it early, some of them will take it late. And then there are a number of people from other areas that also take it. Writing is a major aspect of the course. We have, I guess, 10 laboratory experiments. Some of them are multiple week experiments, and each of those will have a written report that students hand in. We have teaching assistants in the course. Depending on which time, various times I've taught this course, it's ranged from 50 to 80 students. So that's roughly the size of the course.
Can I ask about length?
Sorry?
The length of the reports in general, are they?
Early on, they're relatively short. They might be 3 pages or so. Later, when they do like a 2 or 3 week experiment, the reports are major reports and significantly longer than that. And to some degree, we kept the reports short before we were using CPR, because somebody's going to have to grade them. And but also we keep the reports short at the beginning, because they're just getting the hang of doing this. And essentially, we've tried to make a progression through the course of upping the ante a little bit each time. That initially, we have a very simple experiment, very simple report. It does have the sections in it, all the same sections in it that I said. But then the TAs will give them feedback on that report before they go on into the second report. And the second one is actually a CPR report.
Does your rubric change according to
the rubric changes a little bit.
A little, yeah.
Some of the feedback on the rubric changes more than anything else. The rubric is pretty much the same for all of them. That is the questions. But in certain cases, for the calibration, for example, different calibration gets different feedback in the rubric, but the questions are pretty much the same. Okay, so why are we using CPR? Number one item that we were interested in was improving students' writing of these lab reports. We're essentially trying to make, at the end of the course, to have a student be able to write an appropriate scientific report, or at least chemistry scientific report. And when the first time we tried this, the feedback from the TAs after the first one of these exercises is the quality of the report that I read this week is way better than the quality of the report I read 2 experiments back before they did the CPR. And that was our goal. Second thing is educating students about just the process of scientific reports, writing, peer reviewing, and so on. So they're actually playing the role that peer reviewers would in the scientific area. Expose students to a broader range of comments and criticisms of their writing. You can see how that works because they get feedback from other students, not just their TA. And before we started doing this, the only feedback they got was from their TA who graded their lab report. And it also reduces the grading load. And in the past year or so, the number of hours that our TAs can work has gone down. And fortunately, we didn't have to do much about that in this course because the grading load was less because of the CPR. Yeah.
Does that mean you're using the peer review grade in some way in the course grade?
Yes. It's the same as essentially experiment 1, the TA grades it, the student gets a grade. It's a 10-point experiment. They get an 8, whatever. Get feedback from the TA, but the TAs can jot down only so much feedback. Second one is a CPR. It's another 10-point experiment. From the CPR, they'll get a grade of, say, 8. That counts the same as the 8 that they got from the TA graded experiment.
And did you say that it somehow factors in how well they grade their
Yes.
paper in?
Yes.
So do they grade their own?
You can adjust this, but you can make it so that the only thing contributing to the grade was the quality of their report, as determined by the peer reviewers. But the way I've got it set up, usually on the first one, there's a grade for how well did they calibrate. That is, did their calibration agree with what we thought it should be? How was their report evaluated? That's the typical thing you would normally expect. How well did their evaluation of their report agree with other students' evaluation of their report? That is, was their evaluation an honest and accurate evaluation of how well they had written the report? And then how well did their reviews agree with the reviews that other students did of the same paper? And the system takes care of all of that. And then you can look at that at the end. There'll be some special cases flagged where either a reviewer was poorly calibrated or there was a big diversity. 2 reviewers gave it an 8, 1 reviewer gave it a 5. Well, then you look at that and see if there's some extenuating circumstance. I mean, nobody knows whose report they're grading, so it's not an issue of the student knew the other students, so they gave them a high or a low grade. But when there's a discrepancy in evaluation of those scores, then you want to look at it at the end. And there's several other little things that you can look at afterwards as well.
So do the TAs go in and do spot checks of
No,
grading? You do.
Well, we have them hand in the report to the TAs, but they don't normally. That's more of, if the technology fails, we still got paper. If there are discrepancies, I don't normally just go spot check.
Okay.
If there are discrepancies, then that's a point to check. And you can bring up everything on your screen. That is, you can see the student's report, you can see what the reviewers were saying, and so forth. So, but I don't specifically go and spot check, although early on this is something you probably want to do, just to see how it's working the first time that you would try it.
And that also, I mean, I imagine the first time that you rate that good example, fair example, and bad example, you want to like watch to see, did that work? Were those?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's when you
well,
spot check.
You actually have to kind of check that because when you do the rubric, you need to answer all those questions about the report that you wrote, the good one, and make sure that it's coming out like getting good answers rather than poor ones on most of the questions.
And then is there norming between, for those examples, do you have Rachel and Judith also look at your good example, medium example, and poor example to sort of check
We collectively wrote those examples.
Okay.
They were initially written in 2012. They've been updated pretty much every semester since.
All right.
By Judith or me. I don't know if you've done any of that, but Yeah, the first ones were not nearly as good as the ones we've got
Yeah.
now.
Of course.
And we created some more of them as we went along also, and then those get vetted. Like Judith had a student, a really good student, who created another set of these essays. She took hers, which got an A, and she made it worse, and she made it really worse.
Nice.
But then a TA and I went through that and looked at it and said, well, when you look at the questions that it asks about it, it could be either this answer or this answer. So we tweaked the report a little bit, or we tweaked the questions a little bit, so that it would be clear that one of them was getting a better result than the other.
To that point, Tim Costian in microbiology also does peer review in Canvas, but he also takes the student good examples and he says, hey, can I take this and use this and modify it a little bit for that good word?
Yeah, or students can be a big help with a lot of these kinds
Save
of
time.
things.
How much time does it take for the students to go through this process of looking at 7 different things? And you get a lot of pushback from them.
They haven't complained about the length of time it takes. They complained about the deadlines.
Okay.
And I don't know how long it takes. It takes a little while to go through the rubric. There's 10 questions on it. And then you look at all the sections of each of those 3 reports. So it takes them a little while. It certainly takes them longer than it takes if the TA grades it. Because then they don't have to do anything. They just turn it in and then they get it back.
But they only have to do 3, whereas the TA would have had to do.
Right. So, well, we already had questions, I guess, but if anybody has any further questions about that part? Yeah.
I was wondering, is it possible in CPR to divide the one PDF file into different ones? For example, in your lab results report, there is like conclusion session file, and then like the experiment explanation session, stuff like that.
Well, if I understand what you're asking, could we just like take the conclusion section and use that for a CPR?
Separate the.
You can use anything you want. It can be short, it can be long. We've done it with the full lab report, but you wouldn't have to.
Can it be multiple files of that?
Oh, I see. Within one CPR segment? Never tried, but I don't think so. Because, I mean, the student uploads one file. It'll be whatever it is.
I guess if you wanted to do it, you could create 3 separate.
You can create 3 separate assignments.
This and this and
Sure,
this, right?
sure.
But it's a little more clunky.
It would be a lot more work initially, but you know, once you had done it, then it would be there. And I mean, we spent a lot of time on this in 2012. We've spent time since, but it's been less. When we created some additional example texts and so on, that took a fair amount of time each time you do one of those. But overall, once you've got an assignment in there, unless you're going to just change everything completely every semester, and I mean, that is an issue because we do the same experiment, they write the same report about the same experiment. They could plagiarize somebody's report from before about that experiment, although it's pretty hard to do because they get their own data, and TAs are pretty good at noticing something like that. If we did all CPR, maybe CPR wouldn't notice, but that hasn't been something that's come up as being an issue.
And can you choose, you have them do 3 others, can you choose to have them do 1 other, 2 other, 5 other, 10 other, can you set that, or is it the CPR defaults to 3, and that's all?
You mean 3 examples? Or
No, the 3 other people that they look at.
I don't
thinking,
think there's any setting for the number of reviews.
I'm thinking of like, what if I wanted to have them just do a short abstract or a paragraph or a summary or something like that, something smaller like that, and not just see 3 others, but see 4 others or 5 others?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's set to 3.
Okay.
I mean, I can't remember seeing a setting where you could adjust that.
Okay.
And Rachel hasn't either, which is much better reflection of what's actually true.
A question actually for John about Canvas then, peer review in Canvas. Do you know, are the peer review features in Canvas similar to this? Or?
So Canvas does not do any of, you can do the automatic assignment of peer review so that Canvas will take care of it the way that CPR is taking care of it. And those of you who know Canvas, please jump in as well if I say anything wrong. And you can have a rubric on it, so that's true also. You can change how many they have to do, so not just 3. But there are certainly, the way that I understand from the research that we did for the note thing is there are certain bells and whistles that CPR has that Canvas does not have. And I'm sure, Sarah, as you're looking at this, what features do you want for CPR? These are the bells and whistles that I don't know necessarily what they are.
I don't think there's anything that does all of the things on that list.
Right.
In Canvas, students cannot grade each other. I mean, they can fill out the rubric, but that grade doesn't go into the grade book. And so as an instructor, you have to pull all those grades, and if you did 3, you have to pull them all, average them, figure out, you know what I'm saying? It's really quite
it's not ready for me.
It's more for like formal feedback from your peers than it is for like graded,
And there's no calibration.
Oh no, it's very simple. Yeah,
the calibration is something you have to set up on your own again. I mean, but if you're already doing the work of making those different examples, it might not be too hard to say before you get going, having even set it up as you must finish this module to calibrate, or this piece to calibrate before you start, before you even take the test, or before you
can make a calibration quiz.
Yeah. For example,
I think CPR makes each of those things a part, or it can be, a part of the student's evaluation. That is my evaluation of the student.
Right.
And that's an incentive to do a good job of it. And they know that you know, they're going to be graded partly on how they calibrate, partly on how well they evaluate other students' papers. And if they're not doing a good job of that, then it's not going to be as.
So it sounds like CPR does a lot of streamlining for you, whereas Canvas, you got to build this component, then build this component, then build this component.
My guess is though after a while, Canvas will be able to do all that stuff.
Well, we've already had, so Johnson Brennan and Tim Hoskin have both given active teaching labs presentations on using the peer review in Canvas. They both started off, so it was sort of their 2012 attempt. So they're all like, yeah, there's some other things that we could do here, but it just started. I bet that even now, if you ask them to come back, they would say, yeah, I had this issue, and now I've figured a way around it. This one I've given up on, and just we do something else. But who knows how that's going to change in Canvas.
I will say we looked, and there's nothing on the roadmap in terms of adding features or making changes to that at this moment. So maybe in the future, but not in the near future for sure.
Now, I guess thinking about that, we pay a fee to use CPR.
Oh, that's my next question, yeah.
And we've done that as a department because we wanted to use it in this particular course and potentially in other courses, although it's not been used in other courses. The really big courses, the freshman courses particularly, we just gave up on the idea because of the deadlines. If you have so many people, they're going to be, 1% of them don't keep to the deadlines. That's still a lot of people. And so we were originally thinking about doing in some of the bigger courses as well. And we kind of gave up on that idea. But with up to 100 students, it's certainly doable.
So is the cost based on number of students, or is it based on number of classes, or a flat fee for the department? Do we know?
Do you know? I don't know. It wasn't a huge amount of money.
Yeah, and it was partly university size or institution size, and partly number of students. Having said that, I think we have some space in our CPR instance. If there was another small class,
if somebody else wanted to do it with
that wanted
another
to try
class,
it out, I think we could fit them in with ours under that license.
yeah, that was sort of what I was leading up to. I think we could do that if somebody wanted to try it out, and you'd also have technical support from Rachel.
What else can you volunteer Rachel for?
What else could you want? So I already talked about some of this stuff. Students enter text, they enter spectra, which are graphics that they record off an instrument, paste them into the text document, chemical structures. They can use a program called ChemDraw to draw a structure and paste that in. It's just another graphic. And then tables of data, these are the main components of what they write. All of those just go into these PDF files, so there's no issue with being able to get those things in. If there were some other application that you're thinking that involves something other than this, I don't know how it would work, but if you could get it into a PDF file, then you can make it work okay.
Have students commented on the usability of the whole process or program? Is it fairly easy for them to catch on to, or does this, okay.
It's not hard for the students to do if they do it when they're supposed to.
Okay.
I don't think, well, we get like maybe one email a semester where the student has trouble logging in. They do have a username that they have to remember that's an arbitrary username. Have many of them forgotten? It says right at the beginning, write this down. Do not lose this because you can't regenerate it.
Nobody writes anything down.
Well, so here's just an example of using the rubric. And I picked the abstract section because I could put a whole abstract on the screen and you can read it. So does the abstract convey a sense of the full report concisely and effectively? Was there a clear statement of the overall findings? And that's the rubric question. Then A, the abstract effectively summarized the full report. B, the abstract summarized some but not all of the content, or did not contain a clear statement of the key findings. And C, the abstract was not a concise, complete summary of the report and the key findings. So this is the rubric that the student would be using. They're looking at the good report, the average report, or the poor report, and they need to choose A, B, or C. And then here's an example abstract. Don't worry about thiatriazoles. Are considered mostly inorganic rings. They're not completely inorganic because they have a carbon in the ring structure. These thiatriazoles are interesting to study because they decompose into gas when they are heated. In this lab, 2 different 1, 2, 3, 4 thiatriazoles were synthesized and characterized over 1 night period. How would you rate that based on the rubric? Well, here's another one. I'll come back to how you would do it on the rubric. That was more of a rhetorical than real question. But 2 different 1, 2, 3, 4 thiatriazoles were synthesized and characterized with IR and UV-vis spectroscopy and a melt temp apparatus to determine decomposition temperatures. Products were obtained in poor yield and with possible impurities, but decomposed rapidly.
I like this one better.
And here's the third one. Almost the same, except that it says what compounds they started with when they synthesized these thiatriazoles. And I gave them to you in the order poor, average, good. Then for the first one, the answer that we put in was C. The abstract is not a concise, it's definitely not concise. Complete, it's not complete either. Summary of the report, and it doesn't really give you the key findings. And then it says what's wrong with it. So if a student had chosen that, they can see the feedback also as to why that was the response that was appropriate. For the second one, abstract gives a reasonable summary of the experiment, but is missing some information. The reactants in the synthesis are not given. But otherwise, it was a pretty good abstract. And then the abstract effectively summarizes the experiment and its results. A superior abstract would be more specific, stating that the impurity was inferred based on lower than literature values for decomposition temperatures, and the impurity might be water based on IR spectra. So even the good one, we're making some suggestions about how it might have been better. It's good enough, and if a TA were grading it, they would probably just say, okay, that abstract's all right. And the student would get no feedback, but here they get some feedback. Because in most of these, we've put in something that says, yes, it's good, but it could be better. and here's how it could be better. And that we didn't have that in 2012. This developed over time as we were doing this, as we refined from one semester to another. Questions about that? I know you don't know, probably don't care what diatriazoles are, but okay. So then, what do we do to make it work? Well, I actually didn't put this on the slide, I guess. Good technical support is really important. That's Rachel. But we do provide a very specific timeline. And in fact, the directions for students are, for the first time, are pretty extensive. And they go into this idea of peer review. Why are you doing this? Why do peer review? Well, that's the way scientific papers are evaluated. And giving a really, and I also spend probably 5 to 10 minutes in class saying more or less the same thing that's in the written material that we give the students. We emphasize to students that CPR helps them to learn how to evaluate a scientific paper. It's like, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this because you need to be able to write effectively. And this is a way that we've found that really works to help you write effectively. I said this before, but we emphasize to the student that peer reviewers provide courteous, constructive feedback. No nasty comments, well, this is a really crappy paper. And I keep trying to emphasize not waiting until the last minute. And in fact, in support of that, I often email the students the night before a deadline, or if the deadline is late that night, the afternoon or early evening of when the deadline is, and so on, reminding them. And then you can go into CPR and see who's met the deadline and who hasn't, and you can specifically remind students who have not met a deadline. And so it takes a little bit of time and effort there, but it's not an inordinate amount of time. And some of them, at the beginning, you find, oh, the only thing that's wrong is they didn't submit their paper. They only uploaded it. And you can just submit it for them, so that you don't even have to get the student to do anything. So what did we learn? Well, students will miss deadlines. That's probably the biggest thing we learned. I mentioned before, we didn't try this in bigger classes, and that was partly because of the deadline issue. If you have a whole lot of students missing deadlines, then it's a problem. At the beginning, we were worried about students making the PDF files. This was 2012, it wasn't as easy. Most students didn't have a PDF maker on their computer. When we found an online PDF maker, they could just go and make a PDF file. I don't know if anybody uses it anymore, but most students are now sending PDFs back and forth just like everybody else. I try to avoid having a CPR assignment the same week as an exam because it takes more of the student's time to do the CPR assignment than it would a regular report. You don't really want to have any mistakes in the calibration if you can avoid it. First time around there will be some, and then students will be asking, well, wait a minute, this didn't make sense, or I don't understand why it said that. And I think students really do appreciate learning about the peer review, although sometimes they grumble about, oh, why do I have to meet these deadlines and what do I have to do these things? So to me and to Judith, we think it's been quite successful in helping students. Questions, yeah, Jim?
Practical question. So in a course, one given course in a semester, how often do you have them go through doing this? And then with that, how much time, Rachel, do you spend supporting that process?
I thought it was on the next slide, but it's not.
Yeah.
Right now, the first experiment is a regular report, second one is CPR, third one is regular, fourth one is CPR, fifth one is regular, sixth one is regular, seventh one is CPR. No, sixth one is CPR, then the eighth one is CPR out of 10. So it's not quite half. of the reports. The very first report is a minimal report. The third one is also fairly minimal. So taking that into account, probably about half of the major reports are CPR and half are not. And I don't think I would necessarily go to having them all be CPR, partly because the student time issue. But it's really useful to have those roughly half of them that are.
And how much time does it take to support that?
Not much. It's mostly dealing with the students who upload but don't submit. Once in a while you'll have a student with a technical issue, but CPR really runs itself pretty well, especially when you set things up correctly from the beginning like John does.
Okay. Scores on CPR reports are a little higher than on the regular reports. Probably because they're also graded on the calibration, consistency with the other evaluators, and their self-evaluation. It's not just the quality of their report. And if they do these other things conscientiously, they will get good scores on those areas. Student rating, according to the TAs, went up very significantly. We haven't really lately worried about this too much, but early on, we were concerned about that. We didn't have a good way to do a controlled sort of quasi-experiment to show that, but I was happy with just the qualitative evaluation of the TAs saying these reports were so much better after they had done this than before. And they keep getting better during the semester as they do more of it.
So the TAs are happier in grading the ones that they still have to grade because they're better.
Yeah. Well, to some degree, yeah, the grading if the student gets a grade, but to some degree the TA needs to know what the student is doing because that student is in their lab. And that student, if they really don't know what the heck they're doing in there, could be a problem, a hazard. So I wouldn't want to get away from the TA's grading entirely because they need to know what their students are doing. We have some other assignments that are graded as well, but those are graded on a very rough scale. They're like a 5-point assignment, 5 if you got most everything filled in and reasonably right, 4 if you got most everything filled in but not, 3 if you filled in some of it, and 0 if you didn't turn it in, and that's sort of the grading scale, and the TAs look very quickly at those. But the lab reports, they look at really carefully. So here's what we got from a qualitative evaluation from the students. Biggest disadvantage is deadlines. Told you that already. They were worried about student reviewers. I don't think that's really that much of an issue. There aren't that many cases where the student reviewers disagree about the quality of a given text. It's time consuming. Writing the individual report, they don't like writing the lab reports either. But when we first started on this and when these data were taken, I think we were having them do some of the reports in pairs. Now they do individual reports all the time. But that's where that, partly where that one came from. Biggest advantage is the students saw good feedback. They really appreciated the feedback they got. See how other people wrote their reports. They had whatever they were going to do would be what they would continue to do probably. But when they looked at other students' reports, they said, oh, that was a good, I like the way they did that. Learning how to evaluate reports. And they got higher grades. So, but that was not the top of their list as the things that they got. And they thought it was moderately useful. And I think we had a question, how useful was this in learning how to write reports? It was very useful, moderately useful, moderately unuseful, I don't know what we said, and not useful at all or something. So it was a little above average, but what did we think? Kind of told you this already too. We've used it since spring 2012 with 3 different instructors. It's part of the course now. I mentioned the second one as well. mentioned the third one already. Fourth one I already mentioned too, in fact, Rachel. And it's really a component of the course that's there to stay, essentially. If it would become that we could do the same thing in Canvas, we'd switch to doing it in Canvas, I think. But we wouldn't have to pay the fee for CPR, for one thing. That's it.
Any other questions? Yes, Julie.
Just really quick. So coming off of our winter retreat with the Teaching Academy, our theme was empathy and humility. And one thing that I really like about these peer reviews and the amount of peer reviews that students do is I think it really contributes sort of indirectly to a development of humility. Because if you just have a TA, you get a grade from a TA, you can always complain and say, oh, the TA is out to get me, or the instructor doesn't like me.
Yeah.
But when you get that feedback from multiple peers, I think that there's really this, development of humility. So, yeah, I
don't remember anybody mentioning that exactly. I mean, they mentioned being worried about being evaluated by their peers because of what do they know. Yeah. But the process is such that by the time they're evaluating, they actually know something about how to do it. And so I think there was, I think the thing that was on there about worrying about having other students evaluate them was more before the fact than it was after the fact of using it.
And you could probably share that with the next generation of students that, hey, last semester students really did like this, so they had the same worry and that was overcome, so eventually they'll learn.
And I haven't heard that issue raised lately. I mean, usually it's like, we know this works, it'll help you to learn to write better reports. One of the main things you're going to need to do when you get a bachelor's degree is write reports. People in industry where they're going to be hiring chem majors, one of the big things they say is students do not know how to write a proper report. And so, I mean, I do say these kinds of things in class just as a motivating factor.
We are at time. Please help me thank John and Rachel for coming and sharing with us. A reminder to fill out this evaluation form about today, and